It was a quiet Sunday afternoon when everything changed. The air was warm, the kind of day that makes you feel at ease, surrounded by the laughter of family. But for Jessica, that afternoon would mark the beginning of the end of everything she thought she knew. You see, no one expects their world to be turned upside down when they least expect it. But sometimes that's exactly what happens. Sometimes it takes just a few words to shatter everything, to reveal a truth you never saw coming. At first, Jessica thought it was just another family gathering, a pleasant, simple moment in time. But when her mother-in-law leaned in and said those words, everything changed. "You're not good enough for my son." It wasn't just a casual comment. It wasn't a momentary lapse. No, it was a statement with a purpose. Her mother-in-law had decided that Jessica no longer belonged in their world, that she was beneath their family, that she wasn't worthy of her husband. And in that moment, Jessica could have fought back. She could have lashed out. But instead, she did something far more powerful. She smiled. Jessica stood there, frozen, as the weight of her mother-in-law's words settled in. Her heart sank, but her face remained calm, almost too calm. She glanced at her husband, Daniel, sitting across the room, laughing at something his father had said, completely unaware of the storm brewing just a few feet away. Her mother-in-law continued, each word dripping with disdain. "You've had your fun, Jessica. But let's be real, you're not a match for our family. You don't have the right background, the right name. A woman like you will always hold Daniel back." Jessica didn't react. Not right away. She simply set down the plate she was holding with precision, the silverware feeling heavier than it ever had before. It wasn't the first time she had heard those words, those subtle jabs at her upbringing, at her lack of sophistication. But this time there was no veil. This time it was different. "You don't belong here," her mother-in-law said, a condescending smile curling on her lips. "Daniel will find someone more suitable, someone with the right family, the right class. You understand, don't you?" But what her mother-in-law didn't know was that Jessica had already made up her mind. She wasn't going to beg, she wasn't going to fight back. No, she was going to let them think they had won. She was going to walk away just like that, calm, collected, but in control. With a smile that had nothing to do with defeat, Jessica turned on her heel and walked away, leaving her mother-in-law standing there, unsure, confused. She had no idea what Jessica was capable of, and she would soon find out. Jessica had always believed in the idea of family. She grew up with a strong sense of loyalty and love, and she had always imagined that her own family would reflect that same bond. At 32 years old, she was married to Daniel, a man she truly loved. They had built a beautiful life together, a cozy home, shared dreams, and a future that seemed so bright. But all of that was about to come crashing down. One quiet afternoon, while cleaning up after a family brunch, Jessica's world was shattered by a simple conversation. Her mother-in-law, with her usual condescending tone, leaned in and told her, "You're not good enough for my son." Those words stung like nothing Jessica had ever experienced before. She had heard the subtle jabs over the years, the comments about her background, her upbringing, the things she could never do properly in her mother-in-law's eyes. But this was different. Her heart raced, but she didn't show it. Instead, she stood there, frozen for a moment, while the weight of those words hit her like a ton of bricks. The woman she had tried so hard to impress, the one she had treated like family, was now dismissing her as if she were nothing. And to make matters worse, her husband, Daniel, was completely oblivious to what was happening just a few feet away. He laughed at something his father said, unaware that his mother was actively trying to tear his marriage apart. Jessica's thoughts raced. How could this happen? How had it come to this? She had always believed that she and Daniel shared an unbreakable bond. But the truth was staring her in the face. Her mother-in-law didn't see her as good enough. And it wasn't just her mother-in-law. In that moment, Jessica realized that Daniel had been influenced by his family's opinions for far too long. In that instant, Jessica's world felt like it was falling apart. The woman who had stood by her husband's side through thick and thin was now considered unworthy. The sense of betrayal hurt more than anything. Betrayal from the one person she thought she could trust the most. her partner. How could he allow his mother to speak to her this way? But as Jessica stood there, holding the weight of those words in her heart, she knew one thing. She wasn't going to break. She wasn't going to cry. And she wasn't going to fight back, not yet. She wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of seeing her crumble. This was just the beginning of Jessica's journey, and it was a turning point that would ultimately change everything. The lesson here: betrayal doesn't always come in loud, obvious ways. Sometimes it's quiet, disguised in the words of people you trust the most. But when it does happen, it's up to you to decide how to respond. Jessica's path forward wouldn't be one of retaliation or anger, but of quiet strength. She was about to learn a lesson that would change her life forever. Sometimes the best way to take control is to let go and let things unfold on their own. Before the storm hit, Jessica's life seemed nothing short of perfect. From the outside, everything appeared to be in its right place. Her marriage to Daniel was something people envied. They lived in a beautiful home, hosted elegant dinner parties, and seemed like the ideal couple. Jessica worked hard, building her own successful business from the ground up, while Daniel was doing well in his career too. To the world, they were the epitome of success. Every Sunday, the house was filled with the warm aroma of home-cooked meals, laughter and chatter. Friends and family would gather at their table, and Jessica felt the pride of having everything she ever dreamed of. The house they lived in was a reflection of their achievements. Modern, sophisticated, everything in perfect harmony. To anyone who didn't know them, it looked like the kind of life that people would only dream of. Jessica felt she was living the life that so many longed for. She had the loving husband, the career she worked so hard for, and the respect of everyone around her. Her mother-in-law often praised her in front of others, speaking highly of her ability to keep everything together. She worked tirelessly to keep up the appearances, making sure everything was in order, making sure she was always on for the people around her. This was the life she had always wanted, or at least it was the life she had been led to believe was the definition of happiness. But behind the perfect facade, there was something far more complicated, something Jessica had overlooked for too long. The truth was, the perfection she saw around her was fragile. Her husband's smile at family gatherings didn't always reach his eyes when they were alone. The loving gestures he showed her were sometimes followed by cold silences. She'd felt it before but always brushed it aside. After all, they were doing well, weren't they? They had everything they could ever need, or so she thought. But the cracks started to appear. Small things at first. His long hours at work, the late-night phone calls that were always just business. Jessica pushed the thought aside, convincing herself that nothing was wrong. The house was still the same. The dinners were still as lavish as ever. Daniel was still her husband, and life from a distance still looked perfect. This illusion of perfection is something many of us can relate to. It's easy to get caught up in the surface level of things, the shiny, glossy appearance of everything that looks just right. We often find ourselves comparing our lives to others, thinking that if we only had the same things we would be happy. But sometimes the picture-perfect life hides deeper cracks and struggles. The truth: behind every seemingly perfect life, there's often more than meets the eye. Many families, many relationships appear flawless from the outside, but inside, there can be unresolved conflicts, emotional distance, and quiet betrayals. This isn't just Jessica's story. It's the story of many who feel that everything is right, until the day it all falls apart. And as Jessica soon found out, her life wasn't as perfect as it seemed. Her eyes were about to be opened, and the lessons she would learn would change everything. The lesson here is simple: don't be fooled by appearances. What looks perfect on the surface may be hiding the deepest struggles beneath. And the real strength comes from facing those struggles head-on, no matter how painful it may be. The moment Jessica discovered the betrayal, it was like the ground beneath her feet had cracked open. She had been busy in the kitchen, preparing for another family gathering, when the words slipped out of her mother-in-law's mouth like a poison she hadn't expected. "You're not good enough for my son," her mother-in-law said, almost casually, as if it were an everyday truth. But those words stung in a way Jessica couldn't describe. She had always known that her relationship with her mother-in-law was a little strained, but never had she imagined that her own husband's mother would go so far to say something like this. First, Jessica was stunned. She didn't know how to respond, how to react. Her hands froze in mid-motion, holding a plate in the air as her mind raced. How could this be happening? How could the woman who had always seemed so kind, even supportive, suddenly turn on her like this? But then it hit her. This wasn't just about her. This was about Daniel too. What hurt more than the words was the realization that this wasn't the first time her mother-in-law had planted seeds of doubt in Daniel's mind. Over the years, Jessica had noticed the subtle jabs, the way her mother-in-law always made sure to remind Jessica of her humble beginnings, the way she hinted that Jessica wasn't sophisticated enough to be part of their family legacy. But Jessica had always brushed it off, thinking that love would win in the end. Yet here it was, the truth. The harsh, undeniable truth. Her mother-in-law wasn't just making snide comments in private. She was actively trying to break up their marriage, to push Jessica out of the family, as if her worth was measured by something as shallow as her last name or the wealth in her bank account. And the most painful part, Jessica realized that Daniel had been listening. He had been influenced by his mother's views all along. He had been conditioned to believe that his worth, and by extension, his love for Jessica, depended on external validation, on the right family background, the right connections. He hadn't been able to see past his mother's manipulations, and now it was too late. He had let her get to him, to the point where he could no longer stand by his wife. Jessica felt the sting of betrayal, not just from her mother-in-law, but from Daniel as well. She had trusted him with her heart, with her life, but in that moment, she realized he had been blind to the most important thing: his loyalty to her. This moment was a turning point, one that would define Jessica's future. She had to face the reality that her trust had been broken, that the man she had married was no longer the person she thought he was. It wasn't just about the lies or the deceptions. It was about the deep, painful betrayal of trust. In many families, there are those unspoken expectations and pressures. We want to believe that our loved ones have our backs, that they'll stand by us no matter what. But sometimes, family dynamics can be far more complicated. There are often silent power struggles, subtle manipulations, and expectations that can cause cracks in even the strongest relationships. This was the harsh reality Jessica had to accept. Trust is fragile. It is built on a foundation of respect, honesty, and loyalty. And when that foundation is shaken, everything else falls apart. Betrayal in a relationship doesn't always come from where you expect. Sometimes it comes from the people closest to you, people you trust the most. And when it does, it's up to you to decide whether to stand and fight, or walk away and rebuild. In the days following her mother-in-law's cruel words, Jessica faced a choice that would define her future. She could have reacted in the heat of the moment. She could have yelled, cried, or demanded an apology. After all, she had every right to feel hurt, betrayed, and angry. But as Jessica sat with her emotions, she realized that reacting impulsively wouldn't get her anywhere. It wouldn't fix the situation, and it certainly wouldn't restore her sense of dignity. Instead, she made a decision that surprised even herself. She would not fight back. She wouldn't beg for Daniel's love or fight her mother-in-law for respect. No, Jessica would take a different route. She would let things unfold on their own, calmly and quietly. She would step back, let them think they had won, and allow them to reveal their true selves. In a world that often encourages dramatic confrontations, Jessica's choice may seem counterintuitive, but there was wisdom in her decision. She understood that sometimes the most powerful action is no action at all. By not engaging with the emotional chaos around her, she gave herself control over the situation. She wasn't going to allow her mother-in-law's cruelty or Daniel's weakness to dictate how she reacted. Think about it. How often do we find ourselves reacting impulsively when hurt? Whether in relationships, at work, or with family, it's easy to let anger take the lead. We say things we don't mean, make decisions in haste, or push people away when we should be stepping back to assess the situation calmly. But like Jessica, the most empowering thing you can do sometimes is to pause. By stepping back, you gain perspective. You protect your peace. And most importantly, you stop giving power to those who want to provoke you. Jessica chose to be strategic. She knew that any immediate response would only give her mother-in-law the satisfaction of seeing her upset. And more than that, it would give Daniel and his family the opportunity to dismiss her, to continue pushing their narrative. Instead, she quietly began planning her next move, not based on anger, but on strength and clarity. A perfect example of this strategy in action can be seen in many real-life situations. Take, for instance, the story of someone in a high-pressure job, where co-workers are trying to undermine them. Instead of fighting back with petty arguments, the wise person in that situation often takes the high road, proving their worth through hard work and results, not words. Over time, those who sought to bring them down end up revealing their own insecurities, while the calm and composed individual rises above the drama. Jessica's choice to remain composed was her way of controlling the narrative. She wasn't going to beg for Daniel's affection. She wasn't going to fight for a place in his family. Instead, she would let the truth come to light, and in doing so, she would come out stronger than ever. When you choose not to react out of anger or frustration, you reclaim your power. You allow yourself the space to think clearly, to plan your next steps, and to make decisions that align with your values rather than with your emotions in the heat of the moment. It's about taking control of the situation, not by force, but by calm, steady confidence. It was a decision that required immense patience and self-control, leaving without a word, without a fight. Jessica chose to step away from her marriage, not because she didn't care, but because she understood something powerful. Sometimes letting others believe they've won is the best way to ultimately take control. After the confrontation with her mother-in-law, Jessica's heart ached. The words they had exchanged echoed in her mind, but instead of lashing out or trying to explain herself, she made the choice to leave quietly. She didn't pack her things in a fit of anger, nor did she shout at Daniel or his mother. She simply took what she needed and left, her actions speaking louder than any words ever could. In doing so, Jessica allowed them to think they had won. She let them believe they had succeeded in pushing her out of their lives, that she was defeated, that she was the one who had lost. But in reality, the victory wasn't theirs, it was hers. Jessica knew that true strength wasn't in proving herself to them in that moment. It wasn't about reacting immediately, but about giving herself the time and space to think, to plan her next move carefully. She understood that the people who seek to manipulate others into feeling small often do so because they need to feel powerful. Her mother-in-law wanted control, wanted to feel that her son's life would follow the path she'd chosen for him. But Jessica knew that control wasn't something that could be taken by force. It had to be earned. This tactic of letting someone think they have won is something many of us can relate to, especially when we're dealing with toxic relationships or situations where the other person thrives on creating drama or conflict. Think about how often people engage in petty arguments or power struggles just to make themselves feel better. The moment we engage in that cycle, we lose. But when we step away, we remove ourselves from their reach, leaving them with nothing but their own frustration. Real-life examples abound. Consider the workplace environment where one person is constantly trying to sabotage another, seeking to climb the ladder at any cost. The person being targeted might feel the need to fight back, to prove they're better, to stand their ground. But sometimes the smarter move is to remain silent, work in the background, and let the person digging their own hole continue without interference. Eventually, the manipulator will be exposed for who they really are, while the silent individual rises above it all. For Jessica, walking away wasn't about defeat, it was about strategy. By allowing Daniel and his mother to think they had won, she set the stage for a far more powerful conclusion. In their eyes, they had succeeded in forcing her out of their lives. But Jessica knew something they didn't. She was no longer bound by their expectations. She had freed herself from their manipulation, and in doing so, she reclaimed her power. Silence can be a powerful weapon. Sometimes the best way to win a battle, whether it's in a relationship, a family dynamic, or a workplace rivalry, is not to engage in the fight at all. Instead, let them believe they've won. all the while knowing that you are in control of your own journey. In the end, their victory will be nothing but an illusion, while you hold the real power to shape your future. Now that you've seen how Jessica chose to stay calm and let them think they had won, what would you have done in her shoes? Would you have fought back immediately, or taken a different approach? I'd love to hear your thoughts and feelings on this moment. How do you feel about Jessica's decision to remain quiet and let the situation unfold? Drop your comments below and let's talk about it. Your perspective is important, and who knows, maybe your insight could help someone going through a similar situation. As Jessica stepped away from her marriage, the weight of the betrayal slowly began to lift from her shoulders. But what no one knew, what they had never even suspected, was that Jessica had been quietly building something much larger than a home and a family. She had been constructing her own empire, one that would allow her to stand strong, no matter what happened in her personal life. While Daniel and his family believed the beautiful home they lived in was a symbol of his success, the truth was far different. Jessica had purchased the house long before they ever married, using her own hard-earned money. It was in her name, a decision she made years ago, long before Daniel's influence or his family's approval had ever entered the picture. What they thought was a symbol of their joint success was actually a silent testament to Jessica's foresight and independence. But this house wasn't the only thing she owned. Jessica had built an entire business empire from scratch, a thriving company she had poured her heart and soul into long before she met Daniel. She had taken risks, faced countless challenges, and worked tirelessly to establish herself as a successful entrepreneur. Her business wasn't just a hobby or a little project, as her mother-in-law had once mocked it. It was a force to be reckoned with. And what her mother-in-law didn't understand was that the same mindset that had built Jessica's business was the very same mindset that would carry her through the challenges ahead. Jessica's path to financial independence had never been easy. Like many entrepreneurs, she had faced setbacks, doubters, and failures. But each obstacle only made her stronger. She learned the value of perseverance and the importance of maintaining a steady course, no matter how rough the waters became. One of the most important lessons she learned along the way was that true success comes from relying on your own abilities, not on the support or approval of others. Too often we place our worth and success in the hands of other people, whether it's a partner, a family member, or society. But Jessica had learned that the foundation of any empire must come from within. It's about believing in yourself when no one else does, and knowing that your future is in your hands. There are countless real-life examples of entrepreneurs who have faced similar struggles. Take Sarah Blakely, for instance, the founder of Spanx. She built her empire from the ground up, starting with just $5,000 and facing rejection at every turn. But she didn't give up. Like Jessica, she had a vision and the determination to see it through, despite the challenges. Her success didn't come from relying on anyone else's approval. It came from her belief in herself and her ability to overcome adversity. Jessica's empire was built on the same principles. She had taken control of her own destiny, and by doing so, she had created a safety net that allowed her to walk away from her marriage without fear of losing everything. She didn't need to beg or plead for Daniel's love or approval. She had already established her own foundation of success, one that would sustain her no matter what happened. Never place the foundation of your success in the hands of someone else. While love and support from others are important, your true security lies in your ability to rely on yourself. Build your own empire, no matter how small the steps may seem at first, and don't wait for permission to pursue your dreams. As the days passed after Jessica's departure, Daniel's world began to crumble around him. He had lived a life of comfort, believing that everything he had, his home, his career, the lifestyle he had grown accustomed to, was the product of his hard work. He had always felt secure in the knowledge that his family's wealth and influence would protect him, that his position in life was unshakable. But the truth was far more complex than Daniel had realized. As the reality of Jessica's absence sank in, so did the realization that everything he had taken for granted was not his to keep. The house he thought was a symbol of his success. It was hers, purchased long before they ever married. The business he had dismissed as a side project of Jessica's. It was thriving, outpacing his own career. and the life they had built together. It was built on the foundation she had created, not his. Daniel's first wake-up call came when he received a call from the bank. "Your name isn't on the mortgage," the representative told him. Confused, he hung up and called Jessica, but she didn't answer. It wasn't until later that evening when he received the shocking message that would change everything. "The house isn't yours, Daniel." It never was. In that moment, Daniel felt like the floor had been pulled out from under him. The house, the car, the vacations, everything he had taken for granted was suddenly nothing more than an illusion. He had spent years assuming that his success was built on his efforts, on the status he had achieved with his family's name, but he had never truly owned anything. It wasn't just the material possessions that Daniel had lost. It was his sense of identity. The life he had crafted in his mind, a life of success and power, was suddenly exposed as a facade. He had been living in the shadow of his mother's influence, convinced that his worth was tied to the wealth and control of his family. The reality was that his mother had manipulated him all along, and now, in losing Jessica, he had lost everything that truly mattered. What hurt the most was the guilt. The guilt of knowing he had allowed his mother to dictate so many aspects of his life, including his marriage. He had dismissed Jessica's feelings, believing that his mother was right, that his wife wasn't good enough for him. But now, in the silence of his empty home, he was forced to confront the fact that he had pushed away the one person who truly cared for him, the one person who had built a life with him, and the one person who had never asked for anything in return. And then there was his mother, still clinging to the illusion that she could control everything, that she could fix what had been broken. She came to him, desperate and frantic, trying to convince him that things could be repaired. "Please, Daniel," she pleaded. "This was all a misunderstanding. You can still fix this. We'll make it right." But Daniel was no longer the man he had been. The reality had set in. His mother's manipulation, his blind loyalty to her, had cost him everything he cared about. And now, he could see that there was nothing left to fix. This was the point where Daniel's character began to change. The world he had built, one based on power, control, and family legacy, was crumbling. And in its place, he was left with a raw truth. His sense of self-worth had never been about material possessions or family approval. It had always been about his own actions, his own integrity. But now it was too late. He had failed to learn the lesson that many of us fail to grasp until it's too late. The more we cling to power and control, the more likely we are to become slaves to those very things. Daniel's downfall wasn't just about losing material wealth. It was about losing his own identity, his own sense of worth. He had allowed his mother's influence to shape his decisions, to dictate his life, and in the end, he had nothing left to show for it. When we rely too heavily on external forces, whether it's family, wealth, or status, we lose sight of what truly matters. True success comes from within, from the choices we make, the values we uphold, and the way we treat others. When we lose sight of these things, we risk losing everything, just like Daniel did. When Jessica returned, it wasn't out of a desire for revenge. It wasn't about making Daniel or her mother-in-law pay for what they had done. No, Jessica returned because she had something much more powerful to reclaim: her freedom. She had spent enough time living for others, trying to meet their expectations, fighting to prove her worth. But now, she understood something deeply important. Her life was hers to control. Her decision to come back wasn't about confrontation. It was about standing in her own power, asserting her independence, and reaffirming the strength she had built within herself. Jessica realized that true freedom wasn't about escaping her past, but about facing it, accepting it, and then choosing to rise above it. When she walked back into the situation, it wasn't with a heart full of bitterness. There was no anger in her eyes, no desire to make anyone feel small or insignificant. What she had learned in her time away was that revenge could never lead to true satisfaction. The real victory was in taking control of her own life, unburdened by the toxic expectations and manipulations of others. She had already won, not because she had taken anything from anyone, but because she had taken control of her own story. This idea of reclaiming control and finding true freedom is something many people struggle with. Often, when we face betrayal, disappointment, or injustice, we let those feelings of hurt and resentment fester within us. We feel as though we need to hold on to the past, to prove we were right, to make someone feel the pain we've experienced. But the reality is, holding on to negative emotions often keeps us trapped in a cycle of bitterness and anger. It prevents us from moving forward, from truly healing, and from taking back control of our own lives. Think about it. How many people have you seen who constantly relive their past hurts, unable to move beyond them? They let their emotional pain control them, and as a result, they find themselves stuck, unable to live freely. They may think they're punishing the person who hurt them, but in truth, they are only punishing themselves. It's a hard truth, but one that Jessica learned firsthand. The moment she decided to stop fighting against her past and instead accepted it as part of her story, she began to heal. She freed herself from the chains of resentment that had once held her hostage. Real-life examples of people who have reclaimed control of their lives after hardship are countless. Take Steve Jobs, for example. After being fired from the very company he founded, Jobs could have given up. He could have let bitterness consume him, but instead he took a step back, refocused, and returned to Apple years later, leading it to become one of the most successful companies in the world. He didn't seek revenge on the people who wronged him. He chose to use his experience to fuel his growth. Similarly, Jessica didn't return to fight against anyone. She returned to show herself that she was in control, that she had the power to shape her own future. She was free, not because she had brought others down, but because she had learned to rise above the toxicity that once dominated her life. She no longer needed anyone's approval to feel worthy. Her worth came from within. True freedom comes when we stop allowing our past hurts to control us. It comes when we take the reins of our own story and choose to let go of bitterness, anger, and regret. We don't need to fight for justice or revenge. We only need to fight for our own peace and happiness. And when we do that, we regain the power to live the life we've always dreamed of. As Jessica stood at the crossroads of her life, she made a decision that would shape her future forever. After everything, the betrayal, the hurt, the loss, she chose not to rebuild what had been broken, but to move forward and create something entirely new. It wasn't just about business anymore. It was about reclaiming her happiness, her freedom, and her sense of self-worth. For so long, Jessica had poured everything into her marriage, into trying to please her in-laws, and into building a life that others expected of her. But now, after everything that had happened, she understood something crucial. Her life did not need to be validated by people who didn't value her. What was clear to Jessica now was that life wasn't about seeking permission to live on her own terms. She didn't need her mother-in-law's approval or Daniel's love to thrive. She had already built an empire from the ground up, and that same strength would carry her through the next chapter of her life. Her past, though painful, was now behind her, and it was time to focus on what truly mattered, herself. In the real world, there are countless stories of individuals who have been knocked down by life, only to rise from the ashes stronger and more determined than ever before. Take, for instance, Oprah Winfrey. She faced unimaginable hardships growing up, including abuse and poverty. Despite being told she was unworthy of success, she went on to build one of the most successful media empires in the world. Oprah didn't allow her past to define her. Instead, she used it as fuel to propel her forward. Similarly, Jessica wasn't going to let her past define her either. She would build a new life, not out of resentment, but out of a deep desire to create something that was truly hers. Jessica knew that moving on wasn't about forgetting or pretending like nothing had happened. It wasn't about acting as if the pain didn't exist. The pain was real, but so was her strength. It wasn't about being perfect or pretending to be over it right away. Moving on was about recognizing that her happiness was her own responsibility. No one else could give her the peace and fulfillment she sought. She had to find that within herself. So, she set her sights on building a new life, one free from the pressure of family expectations. She started by expanding her business, pouring herself into her work with a newfound sense of purpose. But it wasn't just about financial success anymore. It was about creating a life that was meaningful to her, on her terms. This powerful shift wasn't just limited to her career. Jessica also started to surround herself with people who truly cared for her. Friends, mentors, and colleagues who respected her not because of her wealth or status, but because of the person she was. She spent time doing things that brought her joy, whether it was traveling, taking up new hobbies, or simply spending quiet time alone. True freedom comes from letting go of the need for approval from those who don't appreciate you. Moving on isn't about revenge. It's about reclaiming your power. It's about saying, I deserve more, and I'm going to build a life where I don't need anyone's permission to be happy. As Jessica embraced this new chapter, she found that the power to move on came from within. It was not the absence of pain, but the courage to face it and choose a new path. And as she moved forward, the life she had always dreamed of began to take shape, one that was authentic, fulfilling, and most importantly, hers. After all the chaos, the heartbreak, and the difficult decisions, Jessica had emerged from the storm a different woman, stronger, wiser, and most importantly, free. She had learned lessons along the way that would stay with her for the rest of her life, and as she reflected on her journey, she realized how transformative her experience had been. One of the biggest lessons Jessica learned was that you don't always have to fight to win. For so long, she had been caught up in trying to prove herself to her in-laws, to Daniel, to everyone around her. She thought that in order to find peace, she had to fight for it, to argue, to justify her worth, to make others see her value. But what she realized now, looking back, was that true strength came not from fighting, but from knowing when to let go. The most powerful decision she had made was when she walked away. It wasn't an act of defeat. It was an act of self-preservation and wisdom. By leaving, Jessica chose to reclaim her power, rather than continue to fight for validation from people who never truly valued her. She didn't need to fight to prove her worth. She simply needed to choose herself, choose her happiness, and choose to live a life free from the toxic dynamics of her past. So often, we get caught in a cycle of trying to earn the approval of others. We wait for recognition from those who never give it, believing that if we could just prove ourselves a little more, they'd see our worth. But chasing after approval from people who don't truly appreciate us only keeps us stuck in a place of frustration and self-doubt. It prevents us from seeing our own value. Jessica learned that she didn't need anyone's approval to feel worthy. Her worth was never tied to the opinions of others. It was something she had within herself all along. In contrast, think about people who live their lives constantly seeking validation. They constantly seek approval from their families, friends, or society, and when they don't receive it, they spiral into frustration or disappointment. They give their power away by placing their worth in the hands of others, never realizing that true power comes from within. Jessica had been in that cycle once, seeking validation from her mother-in-law, trying to prove herself to Daniel's family, and bending over backwards to gain their approval. But she learned the hard way that when we rely on others to determine our value, we give them the power to control us. The real turning point for Jessica was when she stopped fighting for their approval and started living for herself. She chose to build her own empire, to focus on her own happiness, and to trust in her own strength. She didn't need to prove anything to anyone anymore. And in doing so, she found the freedom to finally live her truth. You don't need to fight for validation. True strength comes from knowing your worth and choosing to live your life based on your own values, not on what others think of you. When we stop chasing approval, we stop giving away our power. And when we find the courage to let go of toxic relationships and situations, we open ourselves up to a life that is truly our own. Thank you so much for sticking with us until the end of Jessica's journey. What a powerful story of resilience, strength, and reclaiming one's power, right? The lesson here is clear. Sometimes the greatest victory isn't in fighting back, but in choosing to stand tall and rise above. Jessica didn't need to prove herself to anyone, and in the end, her silence spoke volumes. What's your take on this story? What lessons do you think we can all take away from Jessica's experience? I'd love to hear your thoughts and feelings, so drop a comment below and let's chat. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more inspiring stories coming your way. Thanks again for watching, And I can't wait to see you in the next one.